With the one tail, this guy's clocking in at almost 2,000 triangles. I'm surprised it's that high. That seems like a lot for a Nintendo DS game. Welcome to Content Free Time, the show where we compare 3D models in video games. Today we're going to be looking at Tails miles per hour, starting with his very first model from Sonic R, released in 1997 for the Sega Saturn. It's not a bad model. I wouldn't say it's a particularly great model either. I don't think it looks as good as the Sonic model from that game. Compared to his Sonic 3 sprite, the coloring's almost perfect, almost identical. The fur is a nice shade of orange, the shoes are a nice shade of red. The most notable difference, I would say, is his tails. His tails are way smaller in Sonic R. Other than that, his head is maybe a little too tall, and for some reason they didn't put any textures on the inside of his ears. His ears are just plain orange triangles. Not bad, pretty solid first attempt, I'd say. Next up is his model from Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast. He's got one more tuft of fur on the side of his face there, but they're still just straight up triangles. There's no weight to them, they just stick straight out. He does have the whites on the inside of his ears back now, which looks a little better. And he's got blue eyes now, which gives him a little bit more personality, I'd say. Especially with that extra little sparkle they put in there. Another interesting touch I never really noticed until examining this model is that he's got little black stripes around the base of his gloves and his shoes now. They look fine, I guess. I can take them or leave them. The tails themselves are still pretty small though. You can see here, they're maybe just ever so slightly bigger than his tails from Sonic R. They do have a bit more weight to them now though, at least they're not sticking straight out like they were in that game. His chest fur also sticks out a little bit more. I think that adds a little bit more to the body, rather than just having this completely circular body like he had in Sonic R. The triangle count here was a little more than doubled. We went from 425 triangles to 997 triangles. Next up is Sonic Shuffle Tails. He looks nearly identical to his Sonic Adventure model. I think they just had to lower the polygon count a little bit since there were more playable characters on screen at a time in that game. So interestingly, this is actually a higher polygon count than the Sonic Adventure model. The Sonic Adventure model had 997 triangles. This one has over 1100 triangles. I'm trying to find out where they were used because he definitely looks more blocky. I guess it's just some of the finer details, like you can see his little tufts of fur on his chest there might have a little bit more weight to him in Sonic Shuffle. Same thing with the ones on his face. They look like they might be just ever so slightly rounder. The Sonic Shuffle model has a higher polygon count, but I definitely think the Sonic Adventure one looks slightly better. Next up is his model from Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, which I'm told is nearly identical to his model from the original Sonic Adventure 2. And contrary to what some of my viewers may think, this actually isn't my favorite Tails model. I think it looks really good. I think it probably looks better than the three that we've looked at so far, but there are definitely later Tails models that I like better. I think his shoes look a little too dark and dirty in Sonic Adventure 2. I think his head looks really good, but I think his body is a little too large in comparison to his head. I don't quite like how exaggerated his arms are. You can see they start out really small at the base, and then they get really large as you get to the hands here. What I do like about the Sonic Adventure 2 model is the giant tails. I think that's a lot of fun. They're so much bigger than all the other ones we've looked at so far. They almost look a little silly from the back, but I think from the front they help really get the point of this character across. I definitely like a lot about this model. It's just not my favorite. Next up is his model from Sonic Adventure DX, and despite the smaller tails, I think I like this model a little better than the Sonic Adventure 2 model. His fur is a little brighter, his body is not quite as large, he doesn't have the big clown shoes. The Sonic Adventure 2 model was just over 2,400 triangles. The Sonic Adventure DX one is just under 2,000. So despite being like 500 triangles less, I think I like this one a little better. I like the more balanced look of his limbs on the Sonic Adventure DX model. Next up is Sonic Heroes, the game where they decided to make everyone shiny for some reason. You know, I'm curious, let's get an in-game screenshot to compare. So you can see he's not quite this gold in-game. He is pretty shiny compared to how he looked in previous games, but not quite this shiny. So yeah, this is a little bit closer to what he looks like in-game. And yeah, sure enough, he does have those little black stripes on him in-game. I never noticed that before. Anyway, I think this is a good model. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what changes they made, because I think this model looks a lot different from this one, but you really need to look closely at them to see what the differences are. So you can see his ears are quite a bit bigger in Sonic Heroes. His head is a bit bulgier. His muzzle doesn't stick out quite as much as it did in Sonic Adventure 1. His tails are a bit bigger, his tails are a little larger, and this is actually the first time that he's had those little tufts of fur on the end of his tails. I think overall I still prefer the Sonic Adventure DX look. I'm not a huge fan of the bulgy head, but I do really like what they did with the tails here. So if you saw my Sonic video, you'll know I'm not a huge fan of the original Sonic Riders designs. I thought the limbs were a little too exaggerated in Sonic Adventure 2. They are way too exaggerated here. Look at how gigantic his hands and feet are. I guess the design of the new shoes is kind of cool, but just the proportions of them is way off for me. It looks pretty good in that game, in the whole Babylon Rogues world they set up, but I'm glad they didn't bring this art style back again in future games. So here we are at Sonic 06, the first fully HD game in the series. The Sonic Heroes model was about 2,500 triangles, and even though the Sonic 06 model is almost 3 times that, it doesn't look that much better to me personally. I feel like the lighting is doing most of the work here. Now, I know this isn't quite what it looks like in game. The metallic slider is up pretty high here in Blender, but I just wanted to keep it on because it sort of demonstrates how dark the shading was in Sonic 06. Even in game, this model looks a lot darker than in previous games. The shadows are just a lot darker. You can see if you zoom in here, he's even got a little smile on him now. I think this is a pretty good model. They did keep the little split ends at the end of his tails, which I like. I do think his little 3 hairs sticking out here are maybe a bit too long in Sonic 06. He also looks like he has a little beer belly thing going on now, which is kind of odd, but it's definitely not bad. So before we get to Sonic Unleashed, we've got a few portable and spin-off titles to look at. Here's the Tails model from Sonic Rush Adventure. You can see on this import he only has 1 tail. That must be because they just duplicated the tail in-game. With the 1 tail, this guy's clocking in at almost 2,000 triangles. I'm surprised it's that high. That seems like a lot for a Nintendo DS game, especially when you consider the original Sonic Adventure model was just under 1,000 triangles. In fact, the Sonic Rush Adventure model is almost equal in triangle count to the Sonic Adventure DX model. That's kind of surprising. Yeah, something seems a little fishy here. I put these two side by side for comparison. Here's the Sonic Rush Adventure model on the left here with 1,969 triangles. And here's the Sonic Adventure DX model, which it says is just 10 triangles more, 1,979 triangles. This one from Sonic Adventure DX looks way better. I don't really get it. Even looking at the wireframe here, this looks like way more triangles. Am I missing something here? I don't know, if any Blender experts want to take a guess at what's going on here, let me know in the comments. All that aside, I do think this looks really good for a Nintendo DS game. Ignoring the triangle count, I kinda like this chibi look he has here. His tails are nice and big. I do kinda miss the little split ends at the end of the tails, but everything else about this model I think looks really good. Next up is his model from Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, the Nintendo DS version. Another really clean Nintendo DS model. I like all of the details on his tails this time around. You can see the little patterns there are a lot more detailed than they were in Sonic Rush Adventure. He's got the little split ends back. Though there's something about the face I think I did like a little better in Sonic Rush Adventure. So I don't know, there are definitely things to like about both these models. Here's his Sonic Riders Zero Gravity model. I like this one quite a bit better than the original Sonic Riders model. You can see he's not quite as exaggerated, but he does still have some of the unique features of the Sonic Riders trilogy. He has the fun goggles, the new shoes. I feel like this is a good balance for those games. Next is another Nintendo DS game, Sega Superstars Tennis. Definitely not my favorite of the Nintendo DS Tails models. There's something about this head-to-body ratio that I'm not a big fan of. He looks a little too human-like. It reminds me of his design from the Sonic movie, which looked okay in that context, but for a cartoony Nintendo DS game, not the biggest fan. I also noticed Tails is getting significantly more yellow as we've gone along here. Oh boy, we saved the best Nintendo DS game for last, didn't we? Look at this Sonic Chronicles model for Tails. Okay, so this one's only 366 triangles, a huge step down from all the other DS games as far as triangle count goes. And as far as art style too, in my opinion. I'm not a fan of the really dark, baked-on shading in that game. It sort of fit the mood of that game, and to be fair, you're mostly going to be looking at them from up here, which kind of looks okay from up here. But up close, these textures just look so muddy. When your textures have to be this low of a resolution, I think it's better off to just do what Sega Superstars Tennis did and just use straight up polygon shading rather than trying to let textures do the work. I'd say maybe the one redeeming factor of the Sonic Chronicles model is I do like the shape to his tails in this game. I like how they have some weight to them. They kind of fall down and then swoop up a bit at the bottom. Now this, I'm pretty sure, is peak Tails right here. The models in Sonic Unleashed were just so good. It really looks like a Disney Pixar movie. And the triangle count definitely backs that up, over 20,000 triangles. All of his body proportions look perfect to me. He even still has those little black stripes on his gloves and shoes, but they're way less pronounced in this game, and I think that's the right choice. I think this is the perfect balance. Next up is Sonic Freerider's Tails, and I know I said I liked the Zero Gravity model, but this one might be even better. He might look a bit too similar to mainline series Tails now, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because this Tails just looks so good. Next up is Sonic Generations Tails, and I pulled up some in-game screenshots because there's some interesting things going on with the lighting in Blender here. You can see just in Blender, the Sonic Generations model looks quite a bit darker than the one in Sonic Unleashed, but in-game the lighting looks nearly identical. I know Tails is standing under a tree in this one, so it looks a bit darker, but either way I think these two models look nearly identical. The Sonic Unleashed one maybe looked just slightly better. The triangle count sort of reflects that. The Sonic Unleashed model was almost 21,000 triangles, whereas the Sonic Generations model is just under 19,000 triangles. Next up is the Tails model from Mario and Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games, which is a somewhat significant step down. It makes sense, the Wii was significantly less powerful hardware compared to the Xbox 360 and PS3. But even with that in mind, I think this model looks pretty good. I feel like this is about as good as you can do with a 1200 triangle count. If anything, maybe his ears are just a little bit too large and almost bat-like in that game. Next up is Sonic Dash Tails, the first fully mobile cell phone game on the list. This model looks surprisingly similar to that last one from the 2012 Olympic Games. His legs are maybe slightly longer. They went back to the really jagged transition on his tails compared to the slightly less jagged one back here. One thing I find interesting about this Sonic Dash model is it almost looks like they forgot to color in the little stripes on his gloves and shoes this time around. You can see they're still modeled in here, but they're a really light gray compared to the almost black color that they had before. I do like the weight to his fur in this Sonic Dash model too. They're not just straight up triangles sticking out of his face like they were in the Olympic Games. Next up is Sonic Lost World Tails, which again looks nearly identical to the Sonic Generations and Sonic Unleashed models. They really had more or less perfected him by the time Sonic Unleashed came out, so I don't really expect a lot of major changes after this. That is, of course, excluding mobile spin-off games like Sonic Runners. This model actually looks quite a bit different. I think shape-wise, I preferred the model from Sonic Generations, Sonic Unleashed, and Sonic Lost World, but I do kind of like this orange color he has in Sonic Runners. Here's Tails' model from Sonic Mania. We're just going to take a quick look at this one because this game uses something called vertex coloring, where the coloring is mapped onto the individual vertices rather than a texture file, which makes importing the in-game colors into Blender sort of difficult. But I just wanted to take a quick look at this model since Sonic Mania is such a good game, and I feel like the model really reflects that. It's a really good low poly model. It's not super low poly, clocking in at 763 triangles, but I think it looks really good in the special stages in that game. Next up, we've got Sonic Forces Tails, which again looks pretty similar to the one from Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Generations, Sonic Lost World. It's got about 5,000 more triangles, but I'm not sure exactly where they used them. We're definitely at the point of diminishing returns here. Even when you turn grayscale on and look at this compared to these last few models, excluding the Sonic Mania one, they all look pretty similar. Next up is his model from Sonic Runners Adventure, which looks pretty similar to the other Sonic Runners model. The most major change I'm noticing is his smile is a little bigger. Other than that, it looks pretty much the same. And last but not least, we have Sonic Frontiers Tails, which again looks pretty similar to Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Generations, Sonic Lost World, Sonic Forces. Just a really solid Tails model. He's got some good looking textures on him, good coloring, good shading. I like pretty much everything about this model. Somewhat surprising to me though, is that this model is 22,600 triangles, which is less than his Sonic Forces model. That one had over 25,000 triangles. So his model actually went down in quality compared to Sonic Forces. I guess that kind of makes sense because he's usually all glitchy and sparkly in Sonic Frontiers, so you don't really need to see a high quality solid version of him all the time. But the Sonic Frontiers model for Sonic was just so detailed. I'm surprised this Tails model isn't the same. I guess they just spent a ton of time on Sonic himself in that game. These are my personal favorites here. Starting from the left, we have Sonic R Tails, Sonic Adventure 2 Tails, Sonic Adventure DX, Sonic Heroes, Sonic 06, Sonic Unleashed, and Sonic Frontiers. If I had to pick an overall favorite, I'd probably just go with the latest in the series, Sonic Frontiers. I think it's a really solid model. It looks nearly identical to the one from Sonic Unleashed. The changes are pretty much indistinguishable. Though I would really like to see the Sonic Frontiers model with the orange coloring of the early Tails models. But what's your favorite? Let me know in the comments. Let me know who you'd like to see one of these videos on next, and thanks for watching!